Hi folks, and welcome to part 4 and the final part of our tutorial series covering our RJ Professional. In this video we'll be covering descent, landing and shutdown procedures. As always, we continue where we left off in the previous video, level at 26,000 feet and flying at Mach 0.67. To reduce our workload during the descent and approach phases, we can tune the ILS frequency for the approach in the VHF nav radios now and set the localizer course. On the VHF nav 1 radio, set a frequency of 108.90 in the standby field before then swapping it into the active field. We can repeat this process for the VHF nav 2 radio. In the MCP, rotate both course selectors until they both display 244 degrees. The ILS course and frequency are now set for the ILS 25 right at Brussels. On the main altimeter we can set our barometric decision height of 300 feet. On the EFIS dimming panel, rotate the decision height knob to set the radio altitude decision height to 200 feet on the PFD. The FMS will automatically calculate the top of descent based on the current flight conditions in our flight plan and displays that information on the EFIS ND in the form of a green top of descent symbol on the flight plan. The time and distance to the top of descent is also displayed on the VNAV cruise and VNAV descent pages. Although the FMS will calculate the top of descent, it's still up to the pilots to initiate the descent. Descents in the RJ are typically conducted using vertical speed mode, although level change mode can also be used. There are no descent speed limitations in the RJ until we reach the ATC applied 250 knots restriction below 10,000 feet. The aircraft also has a windscreen bird strike limit of 250 knots below 8,000 feet. When the aircraft passes over the top of descent point, the green top descent symbol will disappear from the ND. To initiate the descent, reduce the altitude set on the MCP to 7,000 feet. This is the first altitude restriction on our approach procedure, and we have to remain above 7,000 feet when flying over the flow via wall. Engage vertical speed mode and reduce the vertical wheel until -2,000 is displayed on the MCP. The aircraft will now begin a descent to -2,000 feet per minute, and the auto throttle will maintain the speed set on the MCP. We can now work through the descent checklists. Switch on the P2U. Confirm the landing altitude is still set to 100 feet on the pressurization quad indicator and that the cabin is depressurized normally. We can now set our speeds for the approach. We can do this manually using a TRP or automatically by clicking on the desired flap setting on the speeds flip chart. We'll cover the manual method in this tutorial flight. We'll be using flaps 33 for landing, which gives us a VREF speed of 111 knots and a VFTO of 165 knots and a VER of 175 knots. On the TRP, rotate the outer knob to the V cross position and then rotate the inner knob until the TRP display shows our VREF speed of 111 knots. This is our landing reference speed. Rotate the outer control knob to the V dot position and then rotate the inner knob until the TRP display shows our VFTO speed of 165 knots. This is our final takeoff speed, and we will use this in case of a go around, and we can also easily calculate our minimum flaps up speed of VFTO plus 10 knots. As we continue to descend, we will monitor the green arc on the ND, which shows the predicted point in the flight plan where we will reach our set altitude on the MCP. When approaching 12,000 feet, we can begin to decelerate to the ATC speed restriction of 250 knots below 10,000 feet. So we can set 250 knots on the MCP and the auto throttle will adjust power to reach the newly assigned speed. We can adjust the vertical speed and use air brakes as necessary. Passing through 10,000 feet, we can run through our approach checks. Set the altimeters to the destination airport's reported barometric pressure, which for today is 1013 millibars. Switch on the fasten seatbelt signs and the landing lights. With 7,000 feet set on the MCP, the aircraft will level up at 7,000 feet and maintain that altitude. Once the aircraft passes the flow VOR, there are no further altitude restrictions until joining the ILS approach. We can therefore set 2,000 feet on the MCP, engage vertical speed mode again, and adjust the vertical speed to provide a smooth descent to the ILS intercept point. When passing through 5,000 feet, we can select the APU master switch to start and confirm the RPM and TGT rise. Once the APU is started, we can switch on the APU air and switch off the 4 engine air switches. We'll now start to reduce our speed to 210 knots, a comfortable speed with which we can fly with flaps retracted. Once within range of the ILS beams, the DME displays on the DBI will display the distance to the runway, and the localizer and glide slope deviation indicators will appear on the PFD. We can now engage VOR lock mode, and the aircraft will capture the localizer. We can now reduce our speed to the VFTO plus 10 speed of 175 knots, and then select flaps 18. Speed checked, flaps 18. We can reduce our speed further to 160 knots and lower the landing gear. Localizer alive. Confirm that the 3 green lights are illuminated. Speed checked, gear down. With the localizer captured, we can engage approach mode, and the aircraft will then capture the glide slope once within range. Speed checked, flaps 24. We can then reduce our speed to the VREF 24 plus 5 speed and select flaps 24. Glide slope alive. Glide slope captured. Speed checked, flaps 33. We can extend the flaps to 33 degrees. With landing flaps set, we can now set our VREF plus 5 speed of 116 knots on the MCP. This is now our final approach speed. We can carry out the landing checks now. Confirm the landing gears are down and 3 greens are indicated. Confirm the brakes are set to yellow. Confirm the flaps are indicating 33 degrees. And confirm the airframe anti and de-ice is off. If the Cat 3 autoland conditions have been met, the respective autoland annunciators will be illuminated on the flight annunciators panel, indicating that a Cat 3 autoland is armed. However, as conditions are perfect for flying today, this is a good time to disconnect the autopilot and autothrottle and fly the remainder of the approach manually.
100.
Air brakes out.
As the aircraft crosses the runway threshold, extend the air brakes and begin to
40,
flare,
30,
gently raising the nose
20,
just above the horizon.
10,
Reduce the thrust levers to idle, and the
Brown
aircraft
area.
should touch down smoothly.
Spoilers, yellow and
After
green.
the aircraft touches down,
Brake pressure
gently
check.
lower the nose onto the runway, and the lift spoilers will automatically deploy. Apply gentle braking, and once the aircraft is
60
slowed,
knots.
turn onto the first available taxiway to the left. Once clear of the runway, we can carry out our after landing checks. So we can ensure the auto throttle is off. Retract the flaps, air brakes and lift spoilers. Switch on the taxi lights and switch off the strobe lights. Set the weather radar to standby and set the tilt to 15 degrees up. And finally set the transponder to standby. We can now begin to taxi to the nearest available gate. When turning into the gate, switch off the taxi lights. Once the aircraft has come to a complete stop, engage the parking brakes. Confirm that the aircraft is depressurized and that the cabin altitude matches the airfield elevation. Before shutting down the systems, pull the master warning system control switch to the fully out ground op position with the red light illuminated. This silences any non-critical master warning system alarms that will sound as systems begin to shut down. On the overhead panel, switch off all hydraulic pumps. Set the generator 1 and generator 4 switches to off reset. Move each thrust lever in turn to the fuel off position, and the engines will now begin to shut down.
Cabin crew, doors manual ankle check.
Switch off the fasten seatbelt sign to release the passengers. We then switch off the fuel pumps, leaving just the left inner fuel pump running for the APU. Switch off the engine anti-ice. Switch off all 5 heater switches. Switch off the ice detection switch. And then switch off the beacon light. We can then use the AFB as we did at the start of the flight to open the passenger and cargo doors, extend the air stairs and enable the chocks ready for deboarding. We can begin the passenger deboarding by opening the boarding menu and then clicking the Start Deboarding button. Once all passengers have deboarded the aircraft, we can switch off the oxygen main valve. Set both IRS switches to off. Note that in order to move the IRS switches from the nav to a line position, they must be moved up over a bulk. This can be done by clicking the centre of each of the IRS switches to raise them. Switch off both EFIS master switches. Switch off the avionics, autopilot and yaw damper master switches from right to left. Once the brakes have sufficiently cooled, as shown on the brake temperature indicator on the centre console, the brake fans can be switched off. Switch off the anti-skid and both yellow and green lift spoiler switches. Switch off the cabin emergency lights and confirm the emergency lights not armed caption is illuminated on the master warning panel. Switch off both Pack 1 and Pack 2 switches, the flight deck and cabin fan switches, and the APU air switch. Confirm that the APU valve not shut annunciator extinguishes within 5 seconds. Shut down the APU by pressing and holding the APU overspeed test button on the ground test panel on the overhead. The button can be released once a decrease in RPM and TGT is observed. Once the APU has been shut down, switch off all remaining fuel pumps. Move the galley's shed switch to the shed position and switch off all remaining exterior, interior and emergency lighting. Finally, switch off the battery 1 and battery 2 switches. As the aircraft falls silent, that signifies the end of our tutorial flight series in the RJ Professional. Hopefully this 4-part series has been a useful guide in getting you up to speed in the RJ. We should stress though that this only just scratches the surface of the things you can do with the RJ. Once you get familiar with the aircraft, there is a lot of fun to be had flying the aircraft with different airline SOPs, such as flights with the autothrottle disengaged or even the TRP turned off completely. The FMS has some useful features too, if you find yourself flying into small, remote airports that don't have the navigation equipment of the larger international airports. The VNAV approach functionality on the approach reference page and the runway extension function on the arrivals page being 2 examples of that. If you would like to know more about the RJ, we would highly recommend having a read of our RJ Professional manuals. There are 3 manuals there, totaling over 300 pages of information to sink your teeth into. Also, feel free to drop by the JustFlight forums for some RJ discussions. On that note, we'll conclude this series by saying a very big thank you to everyone who has made it this far, and we hope you enjoy every moment in our RJ Professional.